Welcome to Story Comic Presents, where we interview amazing storytellers and artists. This is episode 291. I'm your host, Barney Smith of StoryComic.com, and we're excited to have with us the internationally acclaimed and genius game designer behind Mecha Vs Kaiju, Johnathan Wright.
Well, thanks a lot for having me, Barney.
Johnathan, it's great talking to you, because last year I bought Mecha Vs Kaiju. Your book, Mecha Vs Kaiju, probably had the most creative ways of implementing some very specific genre-specific rules, along with making it also that rules-light thing that Fate Core is pretty famous for. So thank you for making that game. But you're here because you are now, as of this recording, you're now launched a new Kickstarter for Mecha Vs Kaiju, 5th edition supplement version of it, correct?
Yeah, this is an entirely new core rulebook for that uses 5th edition as a backbone.
For those that play 5th edition, what are some of the very specific things that they're going to wonder about? Like, this is not kind of like D&D. What are some of those things that you kind of were inspired by the Fate Core system?
Well, so what I really wanted to do was, I'll be honest. A lot of people have asked why 5th edition. 5th edition has taken some knocks because Wizards of the Coast have done some really dumb things over the past few months, and what it comes down to is I'm a grognard. I have played D&D since the 1970s. I love the system. So I always wanted to bring more of a narrative storytelling mechanic to this system that I love. So what we've done is we've taken the D20 mechanic is the heart. So you always roll a D20. We call it the fortune die because it represents sort of the random the random chance of fate. But to add to the narrative elements, we've replaced all the static bonuses with dice, and this adapts the proficiency die mod that is in the Dungeon Master's Guide, where your proficiency bonus is replaced with a die. And we've adapted that to all of the character traits. So instead of having a +1 in a trait, you have a D6. And this goes from D6 to D10. Things that are like really monumental and monstrous can have D12s. And what you do is for each of those traits that I mentioned, each one of them has a die connected to it to show how important that trait is to the character. You pick one trait die from each of your trait sets. You roll them all together with a D20 fortune die, and then you pick 2 of those results as your action total. So sometimes your fortune die is going to really help you out. Maybe you roll a 15 or a 16, and then you're just adding in maybe your result from your aspect, your result from your value. And sometimes fortune is not in your favor, but in those cases, then it's your sort of personality or your intestinal fortitude or your inherent skill that saves the day. So by using dice instead of static modifiers that you just sort of all clump in together, you can narrate how your character succeeds or fails in their action based on the results of the dice. And that's the thing that every change that we've made has always been to add narrative and storytelling elements to the 5th edition system.
Who would you say this game is for? Is it for people that always play 5th edition to want to play Mecha Vs Kaiju? Is it for your Fate Core gamers to want to try a different system but also being similar to the same game? Or is this for like anime fans that want to start playing a role-playing game?
Yes. Yeah, you set me up for that. I had to go for it. So yeah, this will actually. I think this is going to appeal to all of those categories. The anime fans. This system is built like purpose built for creating characters that feel like they are anime characters. So starting with your favorite archetype. If you're familiar, if you're an anime fan, you're going to be able to see. I'm going to make like a really angry character that has like this sort of like secret softer side, or I'm going to play the hime, it's like I want to play somebody who is kind of arrogant and feels like they are entitled, but also carries himself with a nobility, and they try and live up to that aspect. And then each of the character trait sets is going to allow people to kind of craft a character that really feels like they are a part of an anime story. For the Fate Core fans, they're going to see a lot of familiar things here. The aspects, the point buy system for building giant monsters and robots. We use construction points. We use mutation points for the monsters, and we actually have an expanded system for creating powers, talents, and tools. And this is one thing that I think will appeal to the 5th edition gamers. One of the things that Fate Core didn't have was a whole lot of crunch. Basically, everything that felt sort of like mechanical, I added to the system. So the system for creating monsters, creating robots, that was something that I scratch built. So when I created this system, the Mecha Vs Kaiju 2020X, I wanted to create a complete customizable system for making superpowers or character talents or tools and weapons that they could use. And so we have a system of mixing perks and drawbacks. And it's a little similar to the Fate Core system, where basically everything was sort of like equated to a +2 bonus. So in this case, we've got a balanced set of perks that will give you some kind of rules benefit, with a drawback that will make it more difficult or more limited in scope. And you just combine those two together to really create any power that you want. We've got 20 to start with. And if we reach our stretch goals, then we'll be adding more.
Was it easier to take a Fate Core design game and translate it into a 5th edition? Or hypothetically speaking, since you played in both, would it have been easier to take a 5th edition game and then evolve it into a Fate Core system?
Well, this is where my rules writing partner comes in, Jeremy Forbing. He has been working he's been writing for 10 years for D20 and then for 5th edition. So he is I call him my rules czar. He is just a whiz with this sort of thing. And we were talking, and he was talking about a system that would would basically adapt modern storytelling methods to the 5th edition system, and that became the root for our ideas. When he created his system, he created it with the idea of adapting D&D to a storytelling mechanic. So this would be like you'd have a strength, dex, and con with a D6, D8, D10. You would have classes that would give you, the fire class would give you benefits when you're fighting, and so on. And then you'd have you'd add your weapon damage dice to your roll as to form your dice pool. So he was looking at that from like making D&D more narrative and storytelling friendly. And then I took that system, and then actually we both worked hard on creating the trait sets for these characters that would make them really feel like anime characters. And so that's why we focus more on who the character is than what the character can do. So there's no skill lists, and there's no attributes. It's the character's personality, it's their way of doing things, and it's the values they have, the things that are important to them that makes it possible for them to do what they do.
for those that are listening or watching, the question is like, this is great. Johnathan, what's the game about? So what's the world that you've created?
Oh my God, how long have we got? I'll make it simple. I've been writing this for 15 years. So
Yeah.
originally, I had this idea of like, back in 2008. This is actually going all the way back to actually, I've got my the first book here. If I don't know if anybody remembers the True 20 role-playing game. This was from Green Ronin, and they created a D20, like a generic version that could play in any setting. And so they had a contest for writing. Give us a setting that will show off our system. And so I sent them a proposal for Mecha Vs Kaiju, and they wrote me back and they said, you had us at the title, and the rest of it was gravy. So that was where the first Mecha vs. Kaiju system came from. That was for True 20. And this sold about 3 copies because I didn't know anything about selling books at the time. But when I was talking about the setting with my friend John Phillips, who's one of my first game masters, and in fact, we've known each other since we were in 2nd grade. I was talking about this about monsters being created by North Korea using stolen DNA, and he just said, "Wow, monsters on kaiju on the DMZ." So really quick, monsters show up in 1945 for various reasons, and there's a public and a secret origin for the monsters, and they're defeated, and the genetic material is stolen by communist spies and taken to North Korea, where they grow another kaiju, and they begin manipulating the DNA. So they're creating lots of different giant monsters. So Tokyo was attacked in 1954. Attacked again. Japan has attacked again over the years, and other giant monsters start showing up around the world. The conceit of the setting is that every giant monster movie you've ever seen is true. It really happened. So you've got monsters roaming the Pacific and Atlantic Ocean. You've got them flying around. You have giant insects that have devastated the American Southwest to the point where they actually had to abandon an area of the country, basically from the Sierra Nevada mountains to the Mississippi, and so you've got Europe, which has built fortress around its home nations. So you've got an end of colonialism. What happens to Africa during that time? It becomes, they take the reins of their own nations. New nations crop up based on language groups and cultural identity, and all of this comes because of the manipulation of communist countries. So communism loses its political cachet. So you have a world in modern Mecha versus Kaiju settings that has no superpowers, where people are working together a little more because they have a common enemy. And it's not an enemy that is so overwhelming that it's going to destroy the world, kind of like we see in Pacific Rim. It's more like the daily attacks of something that could conceivably destroy your city, and so you have to be on your guard. So it's
kind of like Attack on Titan in a way.
Yeah, there is a real Attack on Titan vibe to it. The Mecha Assault Force is Japan's answer to the kaiju. It first fields remote controlled robots in the 1960s, of course, created by a genius teenager who controls his remote control watch. 1970s has super robots, a la the Shogun Warriors, Mazinger, and Raiden, and things like that. 1980s style is inspired by the sort of mass-produced mecha that you see in like Gundam and other military sci-fi shows like that, and that forms the sort of the core, the core setting for the current game. Each player is an ace pilot of a custom-built mecha, so they basically fight the kaiju in packs. So depending on how big your game group is, it can be like 2 players, 4 players, 6 players, however many people you have in your group. They form the squad that goes out and fights the giant monsters.
So let me ask you then. So Johnathan, I'm sure that the big question that's going to be on a lot of people's minds is, what about Clifford, the big red dog? How does this fit within the game?
I would not qualify Clifford as a kaiju, mainly because of size. He's not quite big enough, I don't think. Although we do have various scales, so it really sort of depends on your campaign. If you're running like a smaller like a Patlabor scale, where or maybe armor trooper Votems, something about 10 or 20 feet tall, then yeah, sure, then it's then it's a fair fight. However, Clifford would make an excellent mascot, the Mecha Assault Force. It's like because come up to about maybe the shin of a of one of their Tetsujin mecha.
Right, yeah. Because he is about the size of a normal sized dog to the size of when you're in a mecha being so giant. So it almost seems to fit. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So they get fun, throwing the ball around and stuff like that. And of course, you need you need something that big in order to clean up after him.
Could you play a kaiju, or you only can play mecha pilots in this?
There's a mod for playing kaiju. The real challenge is, how do you set up a situation where people can play kaiju and role play as kaiju? Now, they did this in some of the later Toho Godzilla movies. You had Monster Island, where all of these monsters were living together. They were living together, right? So I mean, you get Godzilla. Godzilla and Baragon are literally talking in some of these movies. You get word balloons with them actually having conversations with one another, going, "Oh man, I hear there's some problems in Tokyo. We ought to go check it out." So setting up a is challenging, but there is in the original Fate Core game, and that I'm going to adapt into the sort of role playing for people who want to play as monsters, and the sort of the next for those characters is going to be the Monster Maker, and this is the person who has actually secretly been behind the creation of all of these giant monsters. And in the original appearance, I had a number of ideas for game masters about who the monster and what they were doing, and then I basically set it up more as a toolbox for people to create this enemy. So that would become sort of the kaiju character against.
Right. Now, so let's talk a little bit then, Johnathan, about your Kickstarter and some of your tier ratings on your tier levels.
So we have a number of our reward tiers are designed for both new fans and old. We have, of course, the books, an ebook for $25 or a hardcover for $50, 250 page full color.
Wow!
I always wanted. I know, right? This is this is something that I really wanted to to get some bang for the buck, and that includes character design, setting, a starter adventure and a campaign that will sort of introduce this the Mecha Assault Force setting for Mecha versus Kaiju. If we get stretch goals, there will be other settings included as well. For reward tiers at the $70 level, we have a challenge coin. This is something that I've always wanted. Some people love tchotchkes, and I've always wanted to have a coin like this to celebrate our robots and monsters. At the $90 level, you actually get to collaborate with me to add something to the world of Mecha vs. Kaiju's. A new piece of lore, a monster, a robot. Something that you could use in your own campaign as well. And then at the $100 level, we have lifetime membership to our Mecha vs. Kaiju Patreon. And I have to hand it to our patrons. And my patrons have been amazing. In fact, we have a core group at the ACE level that an ongoing online campaign since last August. So we're coming up on a year now. It's pretty amazing. Play testing has been really priceless. The patrons are smart, are not afraid to talk about what's working with the system, what's not working with the system, so that we can make changes. And in fact, every month we've got a new update to the Mecha vs. Kaiju rule set. And in fact, we've got a new significant update coming up in September. So everybody who backs Mecha vs. Kaiju gets a 1 week free membership to our Patreon. In addition to that, every backer will be able to add one Kaiju fun fact or one Mecha milestone to the book. And the biggest reward that every backer gets is the complete Mecha vs. Kaiju library. That is 15 years of worth of work, 20 books for D20 and Fate Core. And anybody who has already Mecha vs. Kaiju in the past, if you've spent $20 on Mecha vs. Kaiju, then back the Kickstarter, you all pour it over.
Well, I gotta say too, then, Jonathan, that is a heck of a deal. 20 books, and then on that, for part of everything else on that $90 tier, that is a really darn good deal for anybody that's interested in that. Plus, of all the benefits else you would get for that, that probably could very well be like the best deal on the internet right now, is doing that $90 tier right there. So talk to us about, as well as, like, I love the idea of actually also putting in your Patreon membership as part of the tier ratings. That's a great idea. Is that something that you came up with?
It is, yes. I wanted to, I wanted to have something that would allow people to really, not just back the book, but feel like they're a part of the community. And the Patreon is amazing for that. I've got a ton of feedback from people, both positive and negative, so that which is needed when you are creating something new and hammering out little details. So I wanted to have a tier where people could, become a permanent part of that community. And so yeah, I think it's I would agree that it is a great bargain. And I'm really looking forward to seeing the kind of feedback and ideas that we're getting from folks who are new to this game, maybe new to the genre, looking, coming in perhaps as 5th edition players with with new ideas, with questions. Questions are really the best part for a game designer. Because if I've got, if it's me and my rules are Jeremy and we're looking at things and we'll be like, oh yeah, this is going to work just great. And then you put it into practice and then you get like 5 or 6 other eyes that are actually using that, and you're like, oh, wait a minute, this is not working at all the way I thought. And of course, the more eyes you can get on it before it actually gets even to that point, the better. So if when we release a new rules update every month, and people start looking at it, they ask questions like, well, what about this? What about that? And it gives us a chance to refine things in the design phase, and of course that's what that's what all of the best game designers do. They throw the game out into the wild, and they let people hit it with hammers and see what breaks.
But I love also that you mentioned too is that people can put in those, as you say, those milestones and facts in there. In a way, you're actually kind of crowdfunding canon for the world you've created.
Absolutely, and giving people a chance to feel like they own a piece of the world.
Right.
I've been writing this thing for 10 years, but last year when I launched the Patreon, I met people from all over the world. I had an idea that I had fans in Germany, in South Africa, in India, and it really opened my eyes to blind spots that I had personally. I'll give you an example. There's an amazing guy named Chereg who runs a group called Desi's and Dragons. It's a live play podcast, and he joined the Patreon and said, "Hey, I'm going to run a." And the setting was absolutely amazing. Set in the 1970s during the partition, with using Hindu religion and mythology, and it made me realize, oh my God, I have never written a single word about India. I had a supplement called Fate of the World, and I had nothing about 1 billion people in the world. So this has been a wonderful experience for me to talk to people that I never would have had a chance to talk to before, and to further develop this this game world that I love, and to make it better reflect the way the world really is.
If people want to learn more about the system, Johnathan, where is the best place they could find Mecha vs. Kaiju right now?
To find out more about Mecha vs. Kaiju setting, you can go to mechavskaiju.com, and right on our front page we've got a section for Mecha vs. Kaiju 5th edition, and that has that has a breakdown on what is involved with the specific rules for 5th edition. I've also got I've got a TikTok page and a YouTube page that has videos, and I'm doing more videos to sort of show elements of the rule set in action. And I've been working with a number of podcasts. Cult of Tea and Dice. We just finished a live play podcast for that, a 3-parter where I ran them through the starter adventure, and that would be a great place to see kind of the game in action.
Now that you're doing this 5th edition version of the game, what about your Fate core readers? Are you putting that on hiatus, or are you doing these also at the same time?
Part of my inspiration for the new system was with Fate. I feel like I've really done as much as I can with that system. Supplement I did was a fantasy book, and that was kind of going as far away from the sort of military sci-fi setting that that you can get, while still remaining very much an anime role-playing game that was inspired by the isekai genre, like Escaflone or Battler Dunbine, or other other stories where humans from Earth travel to a fantasy world and get involved in those adventures. So that was really, once I finished that book, it was kind of like, I felt like there were no more hills to climb for Fate Core, and that was really the inspiration for the new system.
Now, if someone's listening to this podcast and they missed the Kickstarter, if they want to actually pick up and buy Mecha versus Kaiju, would going to the website be the best place to go to, or would that be?
Absolutely, yeah. MechaVsKaiju.com.
So MechaVsKaiju.com is a good place that people could go to.
Yeah, that's where the game lives and breathes, and we have frequent updates there. The Kickstarter pages become like sale pages as well once the campaigns are fun. And our Patreon, of course, will be continuing as well. Patreon.com/Mecha vs Kaiju.
Right. I love the idea that you actually have your you're really pushing out the Patreon piece. That's a great idea. And it's also, as I say, it's a really good Patreon site. It's a great, as you mentioned, it's a great place to actually just get so much information and just going to be part of a very engaging and supportive community as well, and very creative place. So this is great. So listen, Johnathan, you're going to have to come back on when you have another Kickstarter, or if you have more supplements coming out for your Mecha vs Kaiju 5th edition system.
We're certainly hoping for it. Yeah, absolutely.
Right, perfect. All right. Well, thank you so much, Johnathan. There he is. All right.
Well, this is embarrassing.
Well, this is why I'm not doing it live.
Singing my praises, and then I disappear.
You're like, oh, I'm so shy, and just like get off.
Oh, shucks, I can't.
And so